Well, hey everyone, happy Thursday. Welcome to another episode of So What, the Analytics and Insights Live show, which is easy for me to say. I am joined by Chris, I am joined by John, and today we're talking about third-party data to inform your marketing. We often talk a lot about what you can do with your own data and making sure that the data that you're collecting is impactful. But we wanted to take a little bit of a turn because we recognize that there may be other data sources that already exist that have already been collected that you can use to supplement your data or you can use to inform your marketing plans. And so Chris is going to walk through what some of those data sets are that you should be paying attention to and that might actually inform some upcoming trends within your own marketing depending on industry. So Chris, blow us away.
No blowing away just yet. Let's do this because obviously can just start jumping right in. But I want to take a few minutes to talk about how to think about this kind of thing, because a lot of the time, and I'm like the number one most guilty person of this, just kind of rush right in and say, let's play with stuff, like a kid. And there really isn't a point, and you can end up wasting a lot of time. So I'll go ahead and just bring up this diagram. Anytime we're talking about any kind of reporting or analytics and things, there's four things we need in order. We need to have some kind of goal, right? What are we trying to prove? That's kind of like if you're thinking about baking a cake, right? That'd be like your recipe, like what's the cake supposed to look like? What's what's supposed to taste like? Things. It's Katie, you would call it requirements gathering, right?
I would.
Second thing would be the ingredients, which for us in this kind of thing is going to be the data itself. What do you have, right? What do you have to work with? And part of the reason why we're talking about third-party data, and we should be clear, we're talking about third-party publicly available data, not the third party in terms of like cookies and stuff. That's a totally different show, which was 2 weeks ago. This is like, what data do you have and what quality is it? And part of the discussion today is going to be around what data is out there and should you trust it or not. The third is the skills. What do you know how to do? Again, if we're talking about baking a cake and you've never once turned on the oven, it might not go so well. It could actually go really badly. And the fourth, of course, are all the tools. What are the things that we need to do? And the biggest mistake that we see people making all the time is they start at the tools. Like, oh, what tools should I be using to do this? Like, no, it's like, I have a really great waffle iron, right? But if I'm making soup, it doesn't matter how good the waffle iron is. It's going to be the wrong choice. So when we're talking about third-party data, we have to go through these steps in order to make sure that we know what it is that we're trying to do. So, Katie,
yes.
What do we want to cook today? What kind of thing that would you find interesting as an executive of a consulting company?
As the executive, I would probably want to know if marketing budgets are going to start opening up again, because we are marketing consultants. And therefore, I want to know, are companies starting to do better? Are they recovering post-pandemic? No, we're not full post, but you know what I mean? Like, people are getting vaccinated, things are opening up. And so I want to know, will budgets be opening up? Will they be bringing on consultants like us again?
Okay, I think it's a great recipe. That's, we know what kind of cake we want. It's going to be I don't know. I have no.
It's a cake layered with $100 bills.
All right, that works. So the next thing we have, so that's the recipe. We got that down. Next thing is what we have for ingredients. What's out there? One of the great things about the internet and digital governments and stuff is that many different data sources exist that are credible data sources that you can go and get third-party data from. I'll show you just a few of these. So this one is FRED, which is the Federal Reserve Economic Database, which is operated by the United States Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, which is part of the overall Federal Reserve System. Tons of economic data. If it's about money or things that affect money, it's in here. And there's 793,000 different data points, which is a phenomenal catalog. And this kind of thing exists in many different places. So the United States government operates data.gov, where you can go in and find almost anything under the sun, literally under the sun. There's actually a data series from the Department of Energy that tells you sunlight per square foot of the entire continental United States. So like it's how much sunlight things get. And thankfully, we're not the only ones who do this. If you are in the European Union, data.europa.eu, again, tens of thousands of data sets from around the EU on everything you could possibly imagine in languages that I can't speak and can't read, but they're in there with some great data sources. If you're in the United Kingdom, data.gov.uk, for example. Again, lots and lots of data sets of all sorts of things you can plan. Even smaller governments like New Zealand has its own data portal. So if you want to learn more about what's going on in New Zealand. So the nice thing is that for the most part, major nations have done a really good job of publishing data. And when you use their data, they tell you where it came from, the provenance of it, the lineage, which is all very important. Where you can start getting into trouble is when you start going off outside of, I guess, official government sets. So one of the most popular. Go ahead.
I have a question once you get past this.
One of the most popular sites out there that people love is Kaggle, right? Kaggle allows users and companies and stuff to publish data, survival patterns of cancer, stuff like that, Marvel comics, characters and sets. The challenge with some of this stuff is, again, lineage, which means where did it come from? How was it put together? Who put it together? A lot of the time, these data sets are put together by people, so there may be some issues with credibility. The other place that is relatively new that a lot of folks like is Google Datasets. So just type in Google Dataset search. And this takes us to datasetsearch.research.google.gov. So again, let's put in, let's actually do management consulting. And here, Google has all these different data sets of things it's found online that you could get. This is a case where, again, you got to be careful. Some of these are credible data sources. Some of these, not as much. And some of these are even repackaged. Like anything by Statista is data that they took from somebody else and is highly suspect. I would not use Statista, especially because they also charge money to access publicly available data. So avoid them when you can. So Katie, what was your question?
So one of the challenges that I used to run into, so when I worked on the healthcare side of the world, I would often try to supplement my data with publicly available data. And so the sources that I had access to were things like SAMHSA, NSDA, TEDS, NSATs, Dawn. The problem with those data sets is that even if they're published a month ago, they're only good through the end of 2019. And so if I'm trying to make decisions or I'm trying to understand what's happening right now, I can't because the data has a 1 or 2 or even 3-year lag. It's not real-time data. So my question is, Chris, so you're showing us like Fred, you're showing us all of these other data.govs. How up to date are they and how current are they enough that I can make decisions with it as of right now?
It depends.
Okay.
the terms. And I'll show you how you make that determination. Let's put in management consulting here. And with all of these different portals, you get a sense of things like frequencies, and you can choose, do I want data that's monthly, quarterly, annually, things like that? What are the sources, the releases, things like that? What is the geography? So a big part is you can tell, and Freddie even dates it in here. These are the times, this is when the last interval this thing was run. And so you can get a lot of that freshness measure in here. If you need something that is faster, like say daily data, you're going to have to get really fancy. And by really fancy, I mean, you're going to have to take your existing data that you do have that has a significant time lag and run correlation analysis to data that you have that's faster. Say like, if you go to trends.google.com, you can get Google Trends for certain terms and see, is there a strong enough correlation with the fresh data and your existing back data to be able to say, like, yes, we can use this as a predictive tool. We can use this as a fresher source of data until we get the back data, and you're constantly going back and back testing and things like that. That would be the way to handle that more complicated one. So let's look in here. So we have 215 data series about management consulting. Let's look at, I'm going to go with Producer Price Index by industry for management consulting services. So for those who are unfamiliar, the Producer Price Index is what companies charge, what kind of money they charge for their services, right? So in this case, management consulting services, was really, coming along. This is, by the way, this is a scaled index where 100 is June 2006. So it's basically almost like a percentage change in pricing over the years. How much over that 2006 benchmark is this? And we see here things were kind of, going a little bit down and down. Then the pandemic hit, and then suddenly in January, everybody's like, "Hey, we need consulting help to understand like what to do now." Like the pandemic, vaccines are rolling out in some locations and stuff. So what do we do? And so you have this massive spike in what consulting firms are able to charge. I see this and I say, hey, Katie, we should probably raise our prices.
I would agree.
So now the question is, what do we do with this? How do we get this information? Because it's good to have this bookmarked, and this alone tells you a lot, but it would be nice to be able to have it someplace more consolidated. So there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do this. For the easy version, like if you want this in a nice dashboard, you can just download the data. In this case, I'm going to download it as a CSV file, and then go over to a utility of some kind, like Google Sheets, for example. Pop into Google Sheets here. And again, this is the no coding, very low tech approach. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to import the thing I just downloaded. Anytime today, Google.
As I say, this is live without a net here. Right?
This is live with nothing. All right. And my thing that I just downloaded, I'm just going to drag that CSV file in and import my data. And now we can see our series. There's our date, and then there's our series name. Now let's call this Management Consulting Data. And now if I want to make this into a dashboard, I've got my Google Sheet, it's saved. I can go over to something like Google Data Studio. Yep. What did I just do? There we go. And I'm going to connect to a Google Sheet. And I should see, maybe.
Come on, Mountain View, you can do it.
There we go. Well, they're having their big marketing
big show today. Yeah.
Okay, so now I've got my table here, and I can change my metric and now start turning this into, say, like a nice line chart. And now we've got essentially what was in that Fred interface in a Data Studio dashboard. And this is one of many things I could put in, multiple pages in my Google Sheets. Now, this is a very manual way of doing this. This is good for like an ad hoc analysis of something that you have to, present once. Like if you go into Google Data Studio now, you can actually switch over to view mode here. You can say, I want to present this like a slideshow almost, and you can step through your dashboards and stuff, which is kind of fun.
So, Chris, question for you.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of doing this if you have the Fred data? Couldn't you just screenshot the Fred data into your presentation?
You absolutely could. However, if I wanted to bring in more than one series, or I wanted to bring in, say, some data from like my Google Analytics instance, or if I wanted to bring in other data sources, Data Studio would let me put it all in one place, which would be better than, 20 different slides. You absolutely can just take a screenshot, and there's nothing wrong with that, as long as it communicates the information intelligently. The other thing you may want to do is you may want to do some kind of manipulation on the data that isn't necessarily available in just the Fred data. So, for example, with this here, if on my styling alone, let's say I wanted to toss in a trend line. Let's do a polynomial trend line, and let's make it a little easier to see. And make it red. So
That's a
I
sad
can.
trend line.
It's not much of a trend because it is relatively flat, but you can see I can start to do a little bit of data analysis with this. Not a ton because it is still a visualization tool first and foremost. But this would be the basic way of getting at this data and putting it into some kind of system. Now, if you want to get fancy and be more technical, Fred and many of these other services allow you to connect to them via APIs, right? So, and they have a whole list of all the data you can pull and even different programming tools that will help you in the language of your choice to automatically pull this data in. So one of the things that I do is I have a script that I wrote in the R programming language using this library, and for about 40 or 50 different economic indicators, I pull them in and I analyze them. So that would be one, I think, really good way of using a lot of this data. And again, all these different services have APIs. You can sign up for them. They're all free. Well, I mean, your tax dollars pay for them. And then you can turn that into useful information on your dashboards.
Do they not even care about the calls, or is it one of those deals if you started hitting it 10,000 times a day, somebody would come looking for you?
There are limits. There are limits that you can have. Sometimes, though, you get data that is just you've got to manually do something with, and there's no getting around that. It just requires a little bit of mostly copying and pasting. So let me show you an example of this that is a really good opening metric, but is not in a user-friendly format. This is the TSA. You go to tsa.gov. This is their checklist of travel through TSA checkpoints, and they have by day for the last 2 years. This is terrific. This is really useful information because unlike things that are speculative, like the stock market or cryptocurrencies or whatever, you can't fake the number of people walking through a TSA checkpoint. You can't just make that up. You actually have to buy an airplane ticket and take your shoes off and all that stuff. So one of the things that we would like to be able to do is, how do we get at this data? Well, the ugly answer is there is no clean way to get at it. What you have to do is you have to fire up the spreadsheet software of your choice, and as painful as it is, copy and paste it into that software and then maintain it somehow. So I'm going to go ahead. I have my last entry here was the 17th. So let's make a little bit of room. What's today? Today is
27th.
27th, yeah.
All right. So we have data, I think, for the 26th. Yep. And now, ugly as it is, and as low tech as it is, and as painful as it is, we now have this data into a format that can now be processed.
I like how you're calling it ugly, even though it looks exactly the same as the other spreadsheet that you just put together. And in terms of painful, that maybe took you 30 seconds to do.
But it's not automated. That's what it is.
It's not automated.
There's a human there. That's ugly.
Exactly. There's an ugly human pushing the keys, and we don't like that because, again, these are things that I would have to set myself a reminder, like, hey, make sure that you go and do this kind of thing. Now, what do we do with this information? Well, again, this is a case where we could upload to Google Sheets or the software of your choice. I'm going to actually have run it through R because I have an R script that can process that. And now we zoom into this. We can see our plot, our trend line of our travel data. And now what we're seeing here is 2 years and change of the number of passengers going through these TSA checkpoints. You can see pretty clearly when the pandemic really ramped up. And more importantly, the blue line, that blue trend line, really now is starting to get to the point where it was prior to the pandemic. So travel has really started to open up. And this is all travel. This is business. This is leisure. This is, you name it. If you walk through a TSA checkpoint, you're counted in this. So the idea or the ideal would be to bring this data into Google Data Studio as well. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up a second tab here. And I'm going to take my TSA travel data. Just going to do a straight up copy paste for now. Maybe. There we go. Go into Data Studio. And I'm going to add in a resource. I'm going to add in the second page of this sheet. That's not refreshed, has it? Okay, let's refresh that.
What I like about these publicly available data sources is that it's a good way to validate your assumptions. And so the assumption as people are getting vaccinated is that they would start traveling again. And now, instead of just making a statement and having people say, well, how do you know? You actually have the data to back up what you assume is happening so that you can make those decisions around your marketing, around your different efforts to reach out to your audience.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and choose our sheet 2 here. There's our date. Oh, that's not sheet 2, that's sheet 1. There we go. So we have our date, and we have our 2021 traveler. The sheet you're trying to connect to no longer exists. Oh well. We'll figure it out.
See, this is what my charts usually look like, is the data configuration error.
The point being, having those two data series side by side now would allow me to see, oh, okay, the things are opening up, right? Which we saw from our chart, and that prices that management consulting firms are charging has gone up as well. So we know that demand is up based on the travel data. We know that supply is restricted because prices have gone up, right? If supply was plentiful, prices tend to go down when there's more supply than there is demand. And so from a strategy perspective now, the question for us would be, well, how much more could we charge? How much more demand is there? How much faster should we be ramping up our sales and marketing? And one of the a really good proxy for that particular question would be things like, let's go back to management consulting. And we're going to look here now at labor data, right? So this is going to be labor data. And let's just look at the last year, right? So the number of employees, there was obviously a big drop. Let's actually switch to 5-year here. There was a big drop. And now suddenly, not only are we back, did all those people get rehired, but now there's even more. So there's a lot of demand here for, that companies are hiring that many more people to deal with the demand, right? So we've seen the increase on the pricing side. We're seeing the increase here on this side as well. Let's look at things. Let's see. Professional and business services. That's a good data series to look at. Again, 5 years. Look how many more job openings there are now in professional and business services. So the pandemic happened, right? February 2020. We got back to where we were around November-ish, and now we're substantially up in terms of the number of openings. So not only are prices going up, not only are the number of people employed in the field going up, but the hiring is even higher, right? So we saw from the earlier chart, there's a 30% increase in demand. We're now seeing a point where there's a squeeze. So there's just not enough people to fill these particular jobs. So from a strategy perspective, Katie, you've got a strong demand. Yeah, there's insufficient supply in the market and prices are going up. This is a pretty good situation for a consulting company to be in.
It is interesting. And I think that having some sort of understanding of what the data is telling you is helpful too, because you can look at all of this data and go, I don't know what to do with it. So there's more jobs. So what? Or so there's more people traveling. How does that apply to me? And really being able to think through sort of that, I guess, journey of how, okay, if travel is opening up, but I have nothing to do with travel, does that impact me at all?
Exactly. So one of the things that, for example, it's good to know sort of the indicators in your space and to know the indicators in your client space. Like we have clients that are in travel. So the TSA thing is obviously very, very relevant for them. We have clients who are in the broadband space. So understanding broadband usage data would be really helpful. So let's take a look here. Nope, there's nothing in Fred for broadband. So let's try 603 data sets here. Broadband summary, API availability by municipality, national broadband map providers. There's a ton of data. So for that particular client, we could probably find some data that would be very useful for them to forecast as well. But there's even data series that for us, because we're a B2B company, tells you about the overall health of the B2B sector. Let's look at BDI index data. So we're going to be looking for what's called the Baltic Dry Exchange. The Baltic Dry Exchange is the price it costs to ship a container, a cargo container. Let's go ahead and bring this up here. This is not speculative. In order for this index to go up, somebody has to buy a container space on a cargo ship, and it's not something you do for fun, right? This is something that you've got to move goods from point A to point B, and you got to do it, in as cost-effective manner as possible. So this is an index saying what's going on with shipping. There is 2020. You actually saw pretty substantial increases in the early months of the pandemic. No surprise, the world locked down and suddenly this huge demand for everything. Masks from wherever they're made. We saw some supply chain disruptions. And now in 2021, we see that this index has gone really high. It's higher than it's been in 5 years. So we know from a B2B perspective, this tells us that B2B is doing really well because you're shipping stuff, you're moving stuff around. So logistics companies are in strong demand. And again, this is yet another indicator that we would want to take into account as a consultant firm to say, like, yeah, there's really strong B2B demand right now. So we need to spend some time looking at the different markets and see what's happening. Now, how would you know this if you didn't spend a lot of time in macroeconomics? You wouldn't. Which is why it's really important to talk to clients, to talk to customers, to say, like, what's happening in your business. A really good example of this would be if you were talking to a client, so like 4 weeks ago, they're like, oh shit, our business is really screwed right now because we've got 440 tons of ore on a ship that's stuck in the Suez Canal. Right? It's like, what do we do? And that would tell you, oh, my client is affected by shipping. Now I know, okay, well, what shipping indicators are there? If we were to look at, say, one of our clients is based in the city of Minneapolis. Well, great. What are that tells us, Minneapolis and Minnesota and that state has things that are happening economically. Are there indicators like hiring, like the tightness of the job market that would tell us hints about that client? If we look at one of our clients is a med tech company, well, how many more medical claims are being submitted now? How are people going back to the doctor? Or are they doing, treatment at home? That would be data that we would then know to go and search in all these tools and say, okay, can we find data that matches those things?
Well, and I think that you're illustrating the point of why business requirements are so important to do and not skip from, I think it was recipe to tools, because you're describing a lot of things that feel like I have to have an economics degree in order to even think to make the leap from, I'm a B2B consulting firm to let me see what the cost of a shipping container is. But really, you're just playing a logical game of, okay, what is it that I want to know? And then you're really challenging the people that you're working with to really in detail explain how you get from point A to point B. So it's almost like trying to dissect the whole process. So, as an example, let's say, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a shortage in flour because everybody was at home baking bread. And so you might say, okay, well, it's because of the grocery store. Well, is it because of the grocery store? Take it a step back. Is it because of their ability to get it? Is it the prices? Is it the supply? Is it the actual wheat crops? Those kinds of things. And so really starting to walk it backwards step by step and checking in on all of those different data points. And so, Chris, you're able to pull up flour per pound in the city average, it's more than just cost. It's obviously demand. And so if more people are buying something that wasn't ready for that kind of a demand, then obviously there's going to be that gap.
Exactly. It's funny, if you look at this chart, April of 2020 is missing. Why?
Yeah, was that
there
panic
wasn't any. Right? So even something like that, you're like, well, what do you do? So there's that.
Yeah, the point being that if you're not sure like how a publicly available data set applies to you, then start to walk it backwards and think through all of those different scenarios of, well, I'm in a B2B space and I get a lot of my business from, being on stage and speaking. Okay, is travel opening up again? Those like starting to think through how it really does affect your business from every angle. And then you can start to look at those different data sets. Well, travel is opening up. Therefore, Chris is likely to get back on the road again. Therefore, he's likely to have more events coming his way. Therefore, we're likely to have more leads in the pipeline. Therefore, John's going to be really busy soon.
Exactly. At the end of the day, what we're actually really talking about is supply chain analytics. We're talking about understanding and decomposing the supply chain to understand is that what's happening upstream from your business. So you sort of went downstream with that, Katie, right? As travel's doing this, so this will happen, so this will happen. So we can go the other direction too. Travel is opening up. So what's the impact on our clients? What's the impact on their clients? If a conference is in a place where they're starting to realize, like, hey, all of our speakers and 70% of our audience is vaccinated. Great, we can open up. And then you start to say, okay, well, why? Well, because insurance agencies don't want to insure something that's known to be dangerous, right? Their job is to take your money and never give it back to you for any reason. So the next logical step there would be, okay, well, what do insurance prices look like in the entertainment industry? As they start to trend in a different direction, and then take a step further. So again, it's all supply chain and demand analytics to figure out up and down the scope what's happening. Got an interesting question here. Chip was asking, can you speak to the challenge of analyzing data in turbulent times and trying to understand the difference between a blip and a trend? That comes down to math. Specifically, it comes down to understanding change and change of change. So when you have a blip, when you have something unusual, you typically have a very rapid change, and then it reverts to the mean very quickly. It's a big spike and goes back to normal. You see this a ton in things like your Google Analytics account, where like, hey, you had a big traffic spike one day, and you're back to having 5 people visit your website every day, right? That's an anomaly. A breakout, which is a trend, is when you have a change and it sticks. Right, so something happens and it sticks. So if we go back to this management consulting one, go ahead and produce a price index. So got a 5-year spectrum here. If January 2021 had been 127 and then reverted down here, we'd be like, yeah, that was a blip. That was an anomaly, right? But in February and March and April, it's kind of stuck. Right, so that price change has happened, and it is starting to decline, but it's not reverting back to the 105 or 110 level where it historically has been. Even before the pandemic, it was around 110 for a good year. We're at 130, almost 130 now. So that is an example of something where this is a breakout towards a trend as opposed to an anomaly. And generally speaking, when something is a trend when you've got some sustained momentum over a certain period of time. What that period of time depends on the time series and your measurement window. For your website, you might be like, yeah, 7 days is important to us because we're an e-commerce company and we sell stuff all the time. For us, as a B2B consulting firm, 90 days might be the minimum time where we start to say, yeah, it's a trend because if, sales cycles are longer, et cetera. So you have to use some judgments to what your window is, and then use anomaly detection or breakout detection. How fast is the change reverting as you determine it? Is it an anomaly or is it a breakout?
I feel like we could cover trend spotting in a whole different episode, because what occurs to me as you're describing this is it's very easy to get behind in terms of what's trending, because to your point, Chris, you need to see if it sticks. And so are you constantly chasing those anomalies, or are you chasing true trends? And I think that that's something that we should dig into on a different episode in terms of setting up your data so that you can spot those things a little bit more easily. But it's interesting because it does look like it was more of a trend than an anomaly, because even though it is declining, Chris, to your point, it didn't decline immediately.
Exactly right. And, we know also from industry knowledge that consulting firms are really busy right now because people want to know what to do, right? So there is a logical demand to it too. So one of the things that we would, as a next step, want to do, maybe send out a client survey or a prospect survey to our customer base and say, hey, are you facing any new challenges other than the usual ones that you haven't faced before? If so, how can we help? We were just watching 2 hours ago the keynote to the Google Marketing Platform talk, where they said, hey, here's all the cool new things that are coming in Google Analytics. And of course, they're showing it only in Google Analytics 4. And we're all going, well, it's pretty clear which direction we need to be going with this. Like the new imputation of lost data and their new forecasting tools. Like, oh, that's so cool. Oh, it's only in Google Analytics 4, which means that for us as a marketing analytics company, we should be looking at that and going, well, time to put the turn the ads back on our Google Analytics 4 migration service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation that we can have. Again, I feel like it's very easy once we start to get into these episodes to start to digress down the other roads of things that play into understanding the so what of the episode that we're in.
Exactly. So in this case, our key takeaways are this. One, you've got to follow the process, right? Know what the outcome is you're after. Know what data you have to work with. And if you don't know, take some time to explore. Get to know your industry, get to know your customers, get to know what they care about. Something as simple as calling up, the decision maker at your best clients and saying, hey, what do you read every day? Like, how do you get your business news and things? Just something as simple as that can at least give you a hint of, oh, these are the things they're paying attention to. What skills do you have and how well can you process the data? We looked at a couple examples today of real simple, do it in a spreadsheet all the way up to run some code to process the information, and then make a decision about the tools and how you're going to visualize these things. And when it comes to the data sources, again, your tax dollars have paid for an awful lot of this information. And other citizens in other nations have paid for their tax dollars. So New Zealand, thank you. We appreciate your contribution to humanity as a whole. We would love to live there because you have you did the pandemic well. It does help to be an island nation. And so use the data that's out there and be careful with the data sources you have. Some of them out there, less credible than others. And once you've got the data, make use of it, make decisions with it. It's really cool and fun to have, dashboards and spreadsheets and stuff that show all this stuff. But if you're not using the data, it's just a distraction, right? It's a decoration at best. Any parting words, guys?
One thing that I do want to throw out there is you can find a holy grail in this space. If you're in a mature B2C space, I've done stuff in the insurance industry where we could call out our annual goals a year or two in advance. Every year we would hit our goals every year because we knew which economic indicators were going to affect what the business was, and we could just define those goals to make sure we always had 2 or 3% of cushion and hit the number like clockwork every year. So there's huge ramifications if you get this right. There's huge opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah. And spend some time digging into the data, into what's out there and what impacts your business. Again, all the stuff is free. It's out there. You just got to know how to find it and know how to make use of it. All right. So thanks for tuning in today, and we will catch you all next week. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and our weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.